Good morning, I'm Dave Christie with your LaRouche Organization Daily Update for Tuesday, August 26th. Now, I think we all can see we are at a crossroads of humanity for which direction the future lies for people on this planet. As you probably have known, if you've paid attention to the work of Helga LaRouche at the Schiller Institute and her associates here at the LaRouche Organization, you would know that the future of humanity in terms of that crossroad lies across the Bering Straits, where the landmass of Eurasia and the African continent could be connected to North and South America to bring humanity into the kind of economic development and cooperation that will define the future of humanity. Now, I think important just to quickly note, this is not just simply a transportation corridor. This is a development corridor, as LaRouche has defined, to develop with the related manufacturing and processing facilities that would occur along these routes that would overall raise the overall standard of living for the people along those routes, but ultimately for humanity as a whole. Now, I'm going to discuss the Bering Strait connection in the context of the series of upcoming meetings that will be occurring in China and Russia's Far East. But I think in that context, I'd like to also discuss what Trump said yesterday in the Oval Office regarding the issue of nuclear proliferation and what he said is the need to bring Russia, China, and the United States together for a call to limiting the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Certainly, those are all topics. The economic development question, the question of nuclear proliferation could be discussed in Beijing next Wednesday. That's September 3rd, when there will be the commemoration ceremony in China on the end of World War II, the Pacific Theater of World War II. As you probably have a sense of, if you've paid attention to the LaRouche Organization, Helga LaRouche has called for Donald Trump to attend that ceremony in Beijing, and importantly have a trilateral summit between Putin, Xi, and Trump on the many broad issues facing humanity. But obviously at the center of that would be the economic development question, and that, of course, would build on the importance of what occurred in the summit between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump in Anchorage. Now, I think just to cite from Helga LaRouche's petition calling for the three leaders to get together in Beijing, she says that at that meeting, they could pull mankind back from the abyss of annihilation and become the founders of a new era in human history. So while the dangers of nuclear weapons may have, or the use of nuclear weapons may have slightly receded following the Anchorage summit, the underlying reality of the collapse of the transatlantic system, and moreover the desperation of those within the city of London and Wall Street who would like to maintain their hegemony, that danger has not passed. Now, so I'll come back to that issue of Trump's call for nuclear proliferation discussions, but just to give a brief sketch of where we are at, or the upcoming series of meetings. This Sunday, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization will meet in Tianjin, China. That will include 20 heads of state, heads of state and international organization leaders. They're expected to attend. Of note, at least what's known so far, it will include Putin of Russia, as well as Modi of India. Now, I think importantly, just to note some of the other leaders, Sharif of Pakistan will also be there. That's certainly relevant given the recent tensions between India and Pakistan. So perhaps some of the further dialogue between those nations can occur there. We'll have to see. But also Pezeshkian of Iran will be there. It's reported in the media that he will have a meeting with Putin on the sidelines of the summit. There are reports that the military collaboration between Russia and Iran is ongoing concerning air defense systems. Some of these things we can cover in other formats, but I think given the dangers that still exist, though we had the 12-day war, there are certainly a lot of people concerned that those tensions are not over. Now, at the SCO, just to be clear, you're going to have a discussion on the overall strategic situation globally, as well as regional concerns over terrorism, the criminal networks, and so on. But the question of economic development will also be taken up. Now, at the close of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting on Monday, some of those leaders will attend the Wednesday commemoration ceremony in Beijing for the end of World War II. Putin will be there. He's actually going to be there for a 4-day trip to China, so I'm sure there will be lots of important discussions there between he and Xi Jinping. But on the day of the commemoration ceremony in Beijing, we'll also start the Vladivostok meeting called the Eastern Economic Forum. Now, that's expected that will run until August 5th. And Putin will address that forum, the Eastern Economic Forum. Representatives from over 60 nations, thousands of guests will be there, so we can expect a lot to come out of that. And as you all know, we intend to put the Bering Strait connection and the development of the Far East into the Arctic region, which is an important region for all of the mineral wealth and resources needed for all of humanity that reside in the Arctic region. Now, I think all of these, the backdrop of these meetings led Helga LaRouche to tell her associates yesterday in a meeting. She said that the spirit of the future will be dominated in the next weeks, and I dare the prediction that once we are through that period, the shift of power and where the power of ideas is now residing, that will not be possible to be suppressed. So she's clearly referring to the idea that the British control over the nations of NATO, the European Union, and their geopolitical confrontation in the case of Ukraine and other nations, that dominance of that structure on the world, that the shift that will occur over the next few weeks in terms of the Eurasian perspective of development, that shift in where the power of ideas will reside will be changed. Now, as well as what Helga LaRouche referred to was the important statements from Putin at Rosatom last Friday. Diane Sayre covered this in her update yesterday, so you may have heard this, but I think it's just important to stress again, given the significance of his statement. So I'll just read a part of what he said to the Rosatom meeting at the end of last week. Putin said, "We must set ambitious goals and strive to take a qualitative leap in developing our economy and indeed civilization as a whole. First and foremost, this includes work in controlled thermonuclear fusion. Equally fruitful collaboration is needed for another large-scale project, the creation of a space system with a special power plant and a so-called space tug, as in a tugboat, based on a nuclear power unit. Such solutions open fundamentally new prospects for deep space exploration." And then Putin notes that this is crucially expanding opportunities for creativity and self-realization among talented young people. Now, obviously, the controlled use of thermonuclear fusion is a far better alternative than the use of thermonuclear weapons, which leads me to the next topic of the update. So yesterday, Trump again reiterated a call, something that he's called for in the past, which is the need for a dialogue between Russia, China, and the United States on the nuclear proliferation issue. Just to note this, Trump did say this in his first term on a number of occasions, but one, of course, was his meeting that he had in negotiations surrounding a trade deal between the U.S. and China. Now, that trade deal did not come off, given that COVID broke out within weeks of that meeting. And, of course, the blame game began of who was responsible for COVID, and it generally sabotaged U.S.-China relations. Pompeo played a big role in all of that. But anyway, yesterday in the Oval Office, Trump told reporters, in the context of questions that came up surrounding the Anchorage summit, "We would like to denuclearize. It's too much power," and we talked about that also. Again, referring to the meeting between he and Putin. He said, concerning the Anchorage summit, "It was a very successful day for other things because, we're also talking about missiles, nuclear. We're talking about a lot of different things. We're talking about limiting nuclear. We'll get China into that. We have the most, Russia has the second most, and China has third, but China is way behind, but they'll catch us in 5 years." I'm not going to go into the details of, it's generally agreed that Russia probably has more nuclear weapons than the United States or deployed systems. And as far as China catching up in 5 years, I'll leave that to Trump to discuss. But so obviously we don't have the transcripts of the Anchorage summits. We don't know how significant the dialogue was between Putin and Trump concerning nuclear proliferation. I will just say that given that the fact that we really only have one treaty of significance left on nuclear weapons proliferation called the START, and that is set to end next year. Trump did say that there should be some dialogue over that. The Russians, of course, are open for that and would like to see that extended or further negotiations on that. But, given the fact that the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, that Trump got rid of that during his first term, both Russia and China are going to want to see, what kind of commitments and treaties and the details of all of that before they're going to be willing to sign on to getting rid of any of their nuclear weapons. I think just in that context, whenever this has come up in terms of a trilateral discussion between those three nations, China has made it clear that Russia and the United States are the ones with the vast majority of the nuclear weapons on the planet, and therefore those discussions and treaties and so forth should be arranged before China deals with their own deterrence arsenal, given that they have made it clear through their doctrine that they have no first strike policy and so on. It is entirely a deterrence issue. So trust but verify, as is often said in these contexts. And I think the Russians and the Chinese are going to want to see what the United States is capable of committing to. But importantly, at least it was called for. I will just note that the issue of the nuclear weapons proliferation has been central to the LaRouche organization and the work of Lyndon LaRouche in particular. Recall that he was the one that had proposed the Strategic Defense Initiative, which, as Ronald Reagan stated when he announced his commitment to the Strategic Defense Initiative in 1983, in that speech, he said the SDI would render nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. Now, the way that LaRouche had designed that program, or his view of what that should have been, others had their own view, and unfortunately that didn't go forward in terms of LaRouche's conceptions. But LaRouche's idea was to develop space-based laser systems that could make nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. But that was to be part of a larger science driver program, sort of like the Apollo program that saw the push towards the space program and the resulting spin-off technologies driving all kinds of other aspects of the economy. That was LaRouche's conception of the Strategic Defense Initiative. And when he posed it to the Soviet Union and became a back-channel negotiator for his ideas during the Reagan administration, he said that it had to be coupled with other economic development initiatives and collaboration between the Soviet Union and the United States. Issues of agriculture, manufacturing development, infrastructure in general, that was to be central to the SDI, but that it would also, again, be this collaborative science driver approach and would be the basis for collaboration in thermonuclear fusion, as LaRouche designed that policy back in the 1980s. So certainly Putin's echo of the need for collaboration in matters of fusion and space research, that is I would say, an echo of LaRouche's ideas earlier. Now, of course, that didn't go through. LaRouche was targeted by the deep state. There was a raid on his property in 1986, and he and his wife, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, were targeted for a potential assassination. That did not go through, and instead we have had a legal assassination led by none other than Robert Mueller, and that saw Lyndon LaRouche sit in jail for approximately 5 years and sabotaged any initiatives that LaRouche was working on with the SDI. Now, nonetheless, when the SDI was rejected, LaRouche said that the Soviet Union would collapse through attrition. In other words, their arms buildup would lead to the civilian economy of the Soviet Union would suffer to the point that they would collapse. And he said that would occur within 5 years. It happened approximately 6 years later. But at that point, LaRouche proposed instead, whereas others like Fukuyama were trumpeting this as the end of history and a new era of hegemony by the Western-led world order, all that business. Instead, LaRouche said, for true and lasting peace, you needed economic development, and he posed what started out as a strategic triangle of economic development between Paris, Berlin, and Vienna that expanded into his conception for a Eurasian land bridge, which was called the New Silk Road at the time. And while Lyndon LaRouche was in jail under the deep state operation to put him there, Helga Zepp-LaRouche earned the nickname as the New Silk Road Lady for her work throughout the 90s in organizing conferences on this topic of the New Silk Road. That, of course, is today essentially, in key elements of it, realized through China's Belt and Road, and we intend that we make that the world land bridge, as Lyndon and Helga Zepp-LaRouche had organized back in the 1990s following the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union, that be realized today. And certainly the Bering Strait tunnel could be the light at the end of the tunnel, as Putin mentioned that. Of course, he was referring to the question of U.S.-Russia relations, but perhaps it was a poetic way of saying maybe there's other dialogues going on. Okay, so I think just to end, all of this and the LaRouche's role in putting forward these ideas, I think this is what is behind what Helga Zepp-LaRouche had told her associates yesterday, that she said, I think there is reason for hope for humanity simply because the ideas which have been proposed by Lynn and the organization for now more than half a century have fallen on fertile ground. So that is what we intend to do, is drive that process of those ideas becoming reality. We continue to maintain that Donald Trump may be on his way to Beijing next week. We'll see where all of that goes. But in the meantime, we continue our mobilization for this new paradigm. So stay tuned to the LaRouche organization for your updates and other programs that you will see on that site.